So basically, for all of you in the audience, what we wanted to do this year, obviously the Monktoberfest has always been about trying to bring together craft beer and trying to bring together tech. So we've always had the beer, apart from some cameos from brewers at the event, however, we've never actually had them incorporated into the agenda itself. So we have a spread of individuals here, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves briefly. What do you do, and what do you do in beer? So Greg, we can start with you.
My name's Greg Norton. I am the owner of Beer Cellar, which is we call it an artisanal bottle shop here in Portland. We sell craft beer, wine, cider, and mead, but definitely our focus is beer. It's probably about 90% of what we do. We've been in business for about 15 months now, and basically our focus is trying to educate our customers and bring in constantly shifting new beers. We try to rotate about 75% of our stock every 2 weeks, so there's always something new and interesting.
What's going on, everybody? I'm Josh Wolf from Allagash Brewing Company. I've done a bunch of different things at the brewery. My current capacity right now is I'm a sales rep and I cover the state of Maine, but actually started in our warehouse. I worked in production a little bit, worked on the bottling line, and then in our office. So seen a lot of different angles from the brewery, a lot of different facets, and just thanks for having me today.
Hello, my name is Jim Conroy. I'm the brewer at The Alchemist in Waterbury, Vermont. Cheers, cheers. We're trying to bring craft quality to a production facility, which is putting our beers in cans, making small quantities at a time, and doing the best that we can and making solid beer for everybody to drink in New England and beyond someday. But pretty much we're in Waterbury, Vermont, and we're not too far out of that. So even for guys in Maine, this is a tough get, which is really cool. So cheers, cheers, drink up.
Hi, I'm Brian from Stillwater Artisanal. I guess my project's a little bit different than most other breweries. I got this Gypsy Brewer label that I didn't really ask for, but so I mean, after listening to some of the talks, I was here earlier about upstarts. It kind of reminded me a lot of the project. I was just like dabbling for about 6 years at home, just making beer, and I kind of met another guy named Brian, who we're about the same age, and he was starting an import company. He was tired of his job and thought that the beer I was making at home was better than the stuff he was importing. So offered to kind of assist if I wanted to go professional, which was a goal, but I didn't have the money to start a brewery. So I took the elements from what we all had between the skill sets of myself as a brewer and a craftsman and such, and all the the distribution outlets and the business sensibilities that he had, and kind of mashed it together and formed this thing called Stillwater. So yeah, it's good to be here.
I enjoy it. All right, so I'll open up to questions from you guys. So I know actually Neil had a question about the business mechanics earlier. We'll get to you in just a second. I'm actually curious, one of the things that I don't know if you guys from the craft beer world are aware of, this is really pretty unusual for tech to get a whole bunch of people on the stage who, at least in the case of the brewers, are sort of nominally competitors. This doesn't happen, right? Tech is not, sort of for lack of a better term, terribly friendly, to competition. Usually it's, what can we do to wipe out competition and so on. So one of the things I've always appreciated about the craft beer sort of world is that you guys actually work really well together. You try to help each other out. You'll appear at each other's events and so on. So I'm curious for any of you, how is that, how did that come to be? I mean, is that something that you picked up from other breweries? Is that something that you just enjoy yourself?
I think it's changing. I think it was more so. I think not in every way. I mean, I think it's still a friendly community, but the craft beer scene was a big boom when going from like when majority of the beer market is the major labels, like Budweiser and such. But this recent boom of an intense amount of new breweries popping up, I think is going to make a more competitive landscape for craft beer. I mean, but it's like anything. I mean, a growing business and, concept like that is, eventually is, competition's good. It keeps people on their toes and keeps people like making things fresh and progressing. I mean, and much like the tech industry, that's how I would equate it. Is, we don't, how are we just going to keep making, just the old standard beers and stuff? And like this now, I think this, while it's going to bring a bit of, competition, and it's not going to be the most, at times it's not going to be the most friendly atmosphere, it is going to bring new concepts and ideas into the world of what we're doing.
Josh, Jim, any of you guys have?
I'd love to add to that. For us, can everyone hear me out there if I don't have the mic up too much? Great. The world of beer is huge and immense all over the world, and we have such a small corner of that the market is so wide open for all of us. I think for all of us who are doing something special and doing great, we're so far from reaching a cap of that, and our product and our ability to make that product and the ingredients that we have to make that product are in such limited capacity sometimes that I think we're really far away from pushing the envelope of not being able to be together like that. I think there's a ton of space in the market, and competing, like you said, only makes us better. And it's barely competing because there's so much market that we have yet to tap that, we're barely known out of Vermont. People come to us every day from Massachusetts and have never had the beer, and that's 3 hours away. So we have a lot of, you sir. So there's a lot of space to grow with that kind of, and Allagash does it absolutely amazing, and they're a amazing company that has been doing this for a real long time, and market share is a fascinating subject.
Yeah, I think Stephen kind of, collaboration historically in craft beer has been something that's been great. I know, Maine Beer Company and Rising Tide were right in our neighborhood. If they needed, some grain or whatever, right down the street, we'd be able to help them out, and we're happy to do that. So I think in the macro sense, Brian's definitely right. With all these new breweries and all this capacity coming online, it's going to become more competitive, and people are probably going to close in a little bit. But I think in locally, people will still help each other out a lot, and in general, as compared to tech and a lot of other businesses out there that are very cutthroat, it's a lot of there is a lot of collaboration.
I think it's definitely a ways away from stopping that collaboration, especially because it's a lot easier for me to, say, drink a six-pack of completely separate brews than it is for me to run 6 different analytic softwares on my So I think you guys have a different hand in that, in your category of product, where you can kind of market multiple things at once.
Yeah, craft beer is still the little guy, and so it's all kind of the little guy trying to kind of get together and do something bigger. So, a lot of questions. Greg, do you want to comment before we get into these questions?
We don't collaborate at all.
All right, we'll take Chris, I guess.
I guess one of the things that seems to me is that old world, new world brewers seem to be very, very, very different. I'm excluding the big labels, InBev, people like that, but it seems like in the U.S. there's much more experimentation and willingness to just kind of let it all hang out and go in totally new directions. I know Brian and others have worked with European brewers. How do you see that playing out long term as far as new world beers getting into the old world? Because it seems like there isn't much penetration that direction, whereas there's a lot of Belgian and such in the U.S.
We definitely embrace the old world and everything that they're doing, especially at Allagash. Doing Belgian-style beers, we definitely need to embrace that. But I think at the same time, you're right. American craft beer And not even just American craft beer, but a lot, I mean, I think there's a lot of European breweries doing the same thing, but there's a lot of innovation right now. Maybe like Old World is, you can maybe say maybe like, prior to this big boom right here, but this new boom right now, very innovative. People are willing to push the limits, and I think that's a good thing.
Actually, if you don't mind, can I finish
go
up on
ahead,
that? I think a big part of that is American brewing, other than the big three, didn't really have a lot of history. So we're kind of free to play in the sandbox a little bit, whereas, in some other countries, you're expected to stick to an existing style somewhat. I don't think it's fair to say that there's any country in Europe that there's not a lot of interesting beer coming out of right now and that there's not experimentation. Even someplace that's historically as kind of locked in tradition as Germany, you're still seeing, breweries like Freigeist doing some crazy stuff. So I think it might be a little bit behind because, there was more of a tradition there. But we had a lot more to catch up with because, look at the different styles coming out of Belgium. We are still nowhere near, the amount of invented styles in the U.S. that they've been doing there for hundreds of years.
It seems like there's a lot of complexity in your business in terms of legislation that varies by state. And, I know that there's
That's not a fun conversation.
but what do you guys do to try to get more of a level playing field, and what can we do to try to enable that?
Overthrow the government.
Okay, check. Yeah, what else?
Well, like an overhaul. But
I mean, what do you guys do to try to deal with the complexity of
we
this?
just have to play by the rules. I mean, unless
Why will that work?
What's that?
Why will that work?
I mean, unless we're going to overthrow the government. I mean, it's legislation.
But I'll take a specific example. So I don't know a lot about it, but it seems in Michigan there's certain laws that prevent the craft breweries from doing their own distribution.
It's because everybody wants to make a dollar off the product. The amount of hands, like beer would be really cheap if we could go direct to the consumer. I on the other hand, I envy the alchemists big time because the amount that they can sell out of their brewery, like direct, and and the well-deserving profits that they make is great. Me, on the other hand, it's like I have like multiple tiers of taxation, I guess you could call it, because I don't own a brewery, so I'm using someone else's brewery. Then I go through like an importer that does my national distribution, and then every state has its own distribution. So it's like boom, boom, boom. It's like it's taxed on every time. Then it hits the retail, or then it hits the bar, and it makes for an expensive product. In my case, it makes me have to expand the brand to produce more in order to make a substantial income. Because my margins are that much lower.
So how much of that balance, how do you balance the passion for craft with the need to make profit? Right, Jeanette? You're not going to be huge, right?
Why not?
Or is that the goal?
That's my goal.
How do you balance that with your community?
I don't know. At least me personally, I'm not going to speak for the whole beer community as a whole, but just me personally, it's like what I'm setting out. I set out to do something different. Like you guys had Classique today during the lunch break, my canned beer, and that was my deconstruction of the macro lager, but done Stillwater-esque or whatever. So I'm just trying to I want to make something that I'm going for a different approach where I'm trying to make things that don't already exist. So when I do get a market share, there's really no direct competition for what I'm doing, so it's more a secure thing. And I'm doing my best to do it without compromise, because I don't want to sell out. I mean, I could probably sell more beer if I tagged it better, called things, went more straight ahead with its marketing approach, and said, this is my IPA, this is my Pilsner, this and that. But I'm trying to, I want to challenge people, and as much as I can get away with, I will do. But I feel like it's something that, like we talked about, like the growth of the craft beer industry and like how there's so many new breweries coming up. That, well, majority of them are creating the same styles of beer that already exist. So my, I guess like what would be more kind of like in line with what you guys do, it's like I'm trying to create my own path in the industry. And then once it's forged, it's like in order to get on, for someone to compete with me and get on that path, they'd have to just, they're copying, and it's obvious because there's only one person kind of doing that.
Jim or Josh, do you guys sort of look at it differently in terms of growth and so on?
I like Brian said, I don't want to speak for the whole brewing community, but I know how, like you were talking about the balance of profit versus the community and everything. Allagash is privately owned still by one person, Rob Todd, who started the company. When he started, he wanted to start a brewery that was profitable, but make beers that he liked. And, 95 to 2013, we're still doing the same thing. We try to keep as much passion and innovation in the product as possible, make beers that we like, make sure that they're, of quality, very consistent, and then we feel like if we do that, the consumers are getting, smarter. There's more consumers all the time into craft beer, and we try not to think of it that way. We try to think of it, make a quality product, and then let it take care of itself.
So I have a question. This resonated with me a couple months ago. I read an article about how hops fascination is killing the craft beer industry. I want to know how you guys feel about that. As personally, like, I'm not a fan of really hoppy beers, but I've noticed like half the time if I go someplace, they've got most of the taps dedicated to things that it's like, if I wanted to drink Heinz all,
There we go. All right, Jim, your job here is to set them straight.
Sell you on hops. No, to each his own on what we all drink and what we like. And there is such a spectrum of beers that a ton of people are making. And that when hops, it's popular at the moment because it's huge and it's forward and people can recognize the flavor profile. It is not the all end all of flavor profile, and it won't crash the future of craft beer. There's room for everybody's palates on what everybody makes. We happen to make this beer in a can. We owned a pub 2 years ago that went under in a flood, and we had 10 different beers, and there were 3 IPAs on, so 3 IPAs out of 10 beers where you could find sour beers, which are some of my favorites, and from exotic to basic to everything. So it's unfair to just say, let's dominate the world with hops. And from a hop-forward company that makes this heady, this is a small part of what we can do and what beer can do in general. And I don't think anybody should ride a fad of popularity of what people can understand, but it's really easy or easier maybe to sell such a profile because it will knock you over the head. And a lot of people can get that, But I think that's so wrong in an approach to define yourself by a single profile. Even though hops have infinite profiles of flavor, there are still, just a million beers to make. And I'm sorry that hops are popular and are dominating.
And Greg, I'm curious about from the retail side. What do you, in terms of choosing what to stock, in terms of what people want to buy? How do you approach it?
Hoppy beers are tough anyway because you got to turn them over so quick. And hoppy beers lose a lot of their character pretty quickly. So that's a tough thing from a retail perspective as far as carrying inventory and just in time sort of inventory of things not sitting at all. But I think part of the hop thing is going back to even Sierra Nevada, which is for a lot of people is their first craft beer that they tried, their pale ale. hops are part of the American brewing identity. Like if American wine is big, brash, Zinfandels and these high alcohol in your face sort of things. I think it's part of the American thing, or the American, that we're new to the game, so we go big. And then, as people get educated, I think, then it becomes part of their drinking profile. We see, there's an interesting curve to watch a beginning beer drinker. And they start out with pale ales, and then if they get the hop bug, then they go big, and not enough hops will ever satisfy it. But there comes to be a point, and eventually they end up with sour beers, in case you're wondering where that goes. And that's where they live. And then eventually they'll come back to just beers with balance. But hops are part of that, and you just want bigger and bigger and fresher and fresher. So from a retailer perspective, I mean, my job is to turn stuff as quickly as I can as far as hoppy beer goes, and just to get it in and get it out, and never to allow it to sit, because you lose. And it doesn't represent the beer that the brewer meant to make. And that's, I consider, a huge part of our job, is to always make sure that the beer that gets into a customer's hand is the beer that the brewer wanted them to get. If it's old, it goes out. It goes back to the distributor. If, we refuse a lot of beer that's out of code that the distributor tries to send to us. I mean, that's our job, is to represent the beer as best as possible.
Makes sense. Right here.
So you guys spend a lot of your days actually making and selling beer, but how much time do you appoint someone on your teams to talk to customers on the internet? And I'm not talking about their active forums and control slips, I'm talking about So, is that part of your life? Is it hard to kind of come down to the batch and go over and tweet or Facebook?
That's definitely not part of my life as a brewer. We get emails, we receive emails, and we send, responses to those emails, but that's not done by a brewer. Brewer's life is definitely not there.
Guess I can talk for it since I'm the one-man company. And in fact, if anyone knows of an intern that can help me out, I'm actually on the search. But it's like, yeah, I think it's at least with me, I'm a different animal in the beer world. So, yeah, it's taxing. It's like I'm the marketing guy, I'm the conceptualizer, everything. And I do think it's important to, social media is one of the ways that I built my company, and I think it's extremely important. I don't understand. Like, we'll be 4 years in February, and I even have a bar and restaurant that Ryan and Lee, the beer curators here today, run for me in Baltimore. And I don't think we've really paid any money in advertising. So I think it's like, because of people like you creating these social media outlets, I think it's very revolutionary for a lot of industries, but beer especially, because it's very fastly growing, and it's kind of grassroots and stuff like that. And it allows, it's kind of like what MP3s did for the music industry. It's like it allowed you to get your product, or at least to get the idea into people's heads without a huge amount of capital.
Well, actually, I think it's worth, Greg, you may talk about the email lists and Facebook and so on in terms of, what did you move? It was like 37 minutes it lasted? Not even?
I would approximate, if you were asking how much time of my day is spent with social media or the internet, I guess if you include my email list as a whole, probably about 90% of my day. We leverage Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and especially our email list really hard. And what that has allowed us to do is we can bring in stuff that would be considered way too esoteric for a lot of other stores. We can bring in 6 bottles of something, and with a 2,000 person email list, there's a good chance 6 people want that bottle in their hand. And it allows us to turn stuff quicker, which is a big deal to me as far as A, freshness goes, B, bringing in interesting stuff. It's what's next. So we've, and again, the cost that Brian was talking about, advertising is expensive and it's not very targeted. Whereas, anybody who likes us on Facebook, anybody who follows us on Twitter, anybody who's on my email list is at least cursorily interested in what I have to say, or at least interested in beer as a whole. So there's a good chance when I get something in, and yeah, it's allowed us to turn some stuff kind of bizarrely quickly. You know,
Horrifyingly quickly
sometimes, and sometimes it backfires on me, to be honest. And it's a learning process because there's really no book for this. You know, you see a lot in the wine world of people using email lists, and there's not a lot of knowledge out there that I've been able to find on using in the beer world. So it's kind of learning the hard way. For example, there's a wonderful, one of the best breweries in the world out of Belgium, Cantillon, that makes a very hard to get sour beer. And when the festival was in town in June, we were given a very large allocation of Cantillon. Usually we get 3 to 4 cases every couple months. They gave us 22 cases. We thought we were getting a little more. We let our email list know, and at a 1 bottle limit, 22 cases was gone in 8 minutes. Now that backfired on me. I mean, and there was some, you know, and I felt bad about the way it was handled, and I learned from it. But yeah, it does allow you to hit a niche really, really well. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of maintaining it, but it is, you know, why we are able to get in a lot of the stuff we do and why we're able to sell a lot of the crazier beers we do.
Cool. All right. All right, so we got time for one last question. Oh, okay, yeah, Neil, go ahead.
I'd like to ask a question of Brian, since about, if you were on one end of the spectrum where maybe AB and Bev are on the opposite end of the spectrum. For a lot of people who don't know how the beer business works, can you explain the difference between what you do and what happens when most people consume most beer in this country that is sourced from someone like AB and Bev?
I'm not really getting the direct.
I think he's asking more about sort of the nature of Gypsy versus the nature of, if I understand the question.
I mean, in all honesty, I mean this, yeah, but it's not. I mean, it's not all that different. I mean, I'm utilizing other facilities to create something. I mean, it started at way more grassroots and small than maybe a lot of breweries. I mean, I went from just a home brewer to like using a 15-barrel system, but now I just signed a contract in Connecticut to brew on a 100-barrel system. If I could produce on a 400-barrel system, I would do it. So it's like, it's not all that different. And part of me, like releasing a beer like Classique, which is like, you know, it's kind of like a cheeky take on the idea of just beer in general. It's kind of like, I kind of wanted to tie it. It's kind of like a little joke between the macro and the craft side of things, where it's like, all right, well, here's a beer made with corn and rice, Pilsner malt, all the kind of same ingredients that you would get out of a macro beer, but done with the loving touch of a craft brewer. But I kind of want to I personally would just like to see the whole beer world change and just go quality, you know, and not be separated into craft beer and macro beer. I mean, it's gonna take a long time. I mean, there's so much money. I mean, it's massive industry involved, and that's why I say, you know, we talked about like the friendliness within craft brewers, because it's like we have a common enemy to it to a degree. So it always brings together friendship. Here's Tim from Oxbow.
Bells of running a small brewery.
But he just delivered a pig, and he smells like hops. That's a craft brewer for you, full on. So yeah, I mean, I think I've definitely, I'm like still kind of lost track on your definitive question, but it's
all right.
So the lady back there had her hand up like the whole time.
Okay.
So I want to give her
one more, and then we gotta.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask him a downer question, because we were talking about parallels between the startup brewing industry and the startup tech industry. They're both industries that are really dominated by a lot of white guys. In the tech industry, there's a lot of really heated debate about whether this is a really detrimental problem for the industry. Most of our think it is. And whether
There's a lot of white guys in this room.
Well, yeah, I mean, we had to talk earlier to touch upon that. Does that kind of dialogue exist in the brewing industry? Is there, I mean, I know that whenever there's a beer that specifically markets to women, it's just a giant face palm because it's like low calorie, the label is pink and stuff like that.
Well, I mean,
where does sort of the negotiation lie in your industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, and that has to do with more like marketing aspects. In all actuality, when I started out, I actually produced my beer with the target to women first. I've always figured that if you can make a beer that like, women have more sensitive palates, and they, at times, like, think more about what they're doing than the dudes. I know from experience. So I always felt like if you can win over the woman's palate, and you don't market it as a girly kind of thing, like, you know, like, oh, this is a pink beer and blah, blah, blah. But if you can make something that's elegant enough that a woman will drink, but that a man will also enjoy, if his girlfriend is like, yeah, I really love Cellar Door. Like, you should buy more of that. He's gonna drink Cellar Door with his girl. Why not? So it's kind of the same thing that you get from like nightclubs and stuff like that, where it's like you get the women in there, and the guys are gonna follow. So it's like whether or not the white male seems to dominate an industry, the women still have the upper hand.
All right, on that note, can we give our panel a hand?